But I mean, going back to even, stories that I was told when I was younger, and everybody knows things like Aesop's fables and, those types of stories in which, this, I don't even know if it's a stereotype. To me, it's very real in our family about Black people being superstitious, and like it's a theme that has grown up not just within the actual fiction I read, but just in the way that my family and the culture I grew up in, the way we tell our stories.
You know what you should read. You know what you should read. You know what you should read.
It's time for What You Should Read, the podcast all about the titles you need. Join 3 book lovers and a guest as they cover all the best new titles to enjoy with your tea.
I have that, but I haven't read it yet.
Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Rachael.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is What You Should Read,
the podcast where we should all over our books.
And today we are discussing Black speculative fiction, so science fiction, fantasy, Afrofuturism, all kinds of fun stuff. And we will have Stephanie joining us later. But first, I want to talk about what we're currently reading. And one of us just finished a 24-hour readathon. So Rachael,
and
why did you do that to yourself?
I'm so tired. I did sleep. I slept for like 4 or so hours.
Wow.
I yesterday read almost 2 books in 24 hours. I read the entirety of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I loved. It's so good. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's so good. And then I read like 250 pages of the Gilded ones by Namina Forna, and then I finished it this morning. So I'll talk about that later. But yeah, it was really fun.
That's awesome. This was for the Taylor Swift Tis the Damn Readathon.
Yeah, so we kind of made a mini readathon within a readathon. So we called it The Best Day, like her song. And yeah, it just kind of encouraged having fun and self-care and just, taking time to read for a whole day. And then this morning I started another audiobook, Valentine by Elizabeth Wetmore. So I'm already like 2 hours into it because I've just been listening all morning. It's really good so far. A lot of characters, a lot more characters than I would have thought, like point of views. So we'll see how that goes. But I think my next physical book I'll pick up is maybe Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys. That's one of my book of the month books that has been on my shelf forever. So
nice.
It's so good.
I'm sure
I want to read that too. Yeah.
I love Salt to the Sea. So
okay. So you've had quite a weekend of reading. That's great. Kelly, what are you reading?
I am reading They Never Learn by Lynn Fargo, which I am absolutely loving. And I'm reading it for next week's episode. And fun fact, it was actually blurbed by Allison Dixon.
Oh wow!
So that's a fun little tidbit there. But it is about this college professor, and one of her little hobbies is every year she will kill the worst man on campus.
Oh. I love it.
Yes. I think I remember you talking about that when you hauled the book during a recent acquisitions, and I was like, I have to read that.
It is so fun, and I'm probably not supposed to be cheering for her as much as I am, but I really am. I'm just like, good for her.
Mm-hmm. That's so great. Well, this weekend I finished Concrete Rose, and it was so good. You both were right. It is her best one yet. And I wasn't sure how that could be possible, but she just gets better and better with every book, Angie Thomas. And I just loved Maverick so much as a character. It was so great to spend an entire book with him and like seeing what he goes through. And everyone just needs to read it. So that was great. And then I picked up The Bells by Dhonielle Clayton yesterday afternoon. I was reading that on my porch, and I'm going back and forth with the hardcover and the audiobook. And I really really like it. I've had it on my shelf for a little while, and it's about, the premise is really unique. It's the Bells are basically demigods, descended from the goddess of beauty, and they are in charge of overseeing beauty in their kingdom, in the kingdom of Orleans, which is this, I think, made up island in this world, but obviously has some influences from real places. But they, everyone in Orleans is born gris. So they have like gray, pale skin, gray hair, red eyes. They're really ugly, quote unquote. And the Bells, if you have money, the Bells can make you beautiful, and they can change you through their powers. So the main character is born a Belle, and she and her sisters come of age, and then they end up working for the rich and powerful, including the monarchy, and then things start to happen. But so far, I really like it. And Rachael, you read it too, I think, right?
I actually DNF'd it, but more
Oh,
just
okay.
I wasn't in the mood for it at the time. It wasn't like thought it was a bad book. I just was like, meh, not in the mood for
Yeah.
this. No, I haven't read the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm about 100 pages in, and it's really interesting. So we'll see how it goes.
Nice. I think you got further than me.
Okay.
I feel so bad about this, but I got it as a birthday present from Becky, kindred spirit of the pod, Becky. I still have not read it. I definitely will, because I trust Becky's opinion on like everything always. So
yeah,
I will. And I think the sequel is out already.
Yeah, it's a duology. Yep.
Oh, good.
Yep.
I like that. Okay, so we do have book news, but we will be doing that a little later today for reasons. We are going to be introducing a new segment now, Take My Money, where we discuss current book deals that we have heard about. And today is one that I am ridiculously excited for. In a 7-figure deal, Stephanie Laureate Disney Hyperion bought the first 2 books in a planned middle grade series by Leah Johnson, who you may have heard of. She wrote You Should See Me in a Crown, a book I kind of liked last year. And it is, okay, so the first book, Ellie Engel Saves Herself, was acquired after an 11-house auction, which is fantastic already. And her agent, Patrice Caldwell, described the series as a superhero origin story in the tone of the Babysitter's Club.
What?
I am so excited.
Wow.
I love all of these things. And it is Leah Johnson's middle grade debut. It's not coming until spring 2023, which makes me very sad. But they have a little bit of a synopsis, like a very loose one, and it is this. After a freak earthquake hits the 12-year-old heroine's small town, she finds that she has the ability to bring things back to life with her touch.
Wow.
Everything about this sounds completely amazing, and I cannot wait to read it. I seriously can't. So please take my money.
7-figure book deal. That's so amazing. I saw her on Twitter. She just seemed so overwhelmed and happy, and I was so happy for her. And it was just, I mean, that's a huge number and good, it's well deserved. And I love seeing authors getting paid what they are worth.
I love middle grade.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can tell
I love that it's an 11-house auction.
Yeah.
Sorry, I keep freezing.
That's okay. Which publisher? Right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rach.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to remind me which publisher it was, Kelly.
Disney Hyperion.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So really not even one of the bigger publishing houses. I mean, obviously Disney is not small, but
yeah, Disney's been doing more, like they've got the Twisted Tales books. I mean, they're really ramping up, I think, their YA and middle grade publishing.
Yeah.
Because then they have the rights to do I would imagine, to then adapt it.
I would hope so. And that would be very exciting too.
Yeah. Cool.
Yay. I think she'll be a great middle grade writer.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so the next segment we're going to do is called Recent Acquisitions, where we talk about the books that we've recently bought, borrowed, or been gifted. So, Julia, why don't you start us off?
Yes. So my book of the month box came in. So I got What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coster. And I think it's about two families in North Carolina, and they're dealing, it's literary fiction. And there are, I think, two young people who like go to school together, but they're kind of from different sides of the tracks, from what I understand. And so it deals with racism and classism, I think. I don't know that much about it, but I've just been hearing a lot of good things about it. So that's exciting. And then The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, which is, I feel like it's all over the place right now. Like there's so many people talking about this book. I might try to read it for next week because it does sound like a good for her book.
Yeah.
And I think it's about poison. Yeah. Like
I think so.
Yeah. So yay. And then I got The Heiress Gets a Duke by Harper St. George. I don't know why I got this, honestly. Like I'm sure I will like it, but I just feel like I'm getting sucked into anything with a Duke. Like it's working. The marketing is working on me.
Yep.
I mean, that could also be good for her, marrying well, that's not bad.
Yeah. So Kelly, why don't you go next?
Okay, so after last week's very expensive Tuesday, I was determined I'm gonna be so good. Well, I did get one eGalley, Blackout, which is out in June, and it is a novel by Angie Thomas, Dhonielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Ashley Woodfolk, and Nicola Yoon. It is basically like every great YA author came together to write this. I think it'll be sort of a romance. It is Black teens in New York during a blackout. And I don't know what they do. It doesn't matter. I am here for this story. Whatever happens, I'm excited for.
Yeah.
So I got that.
Good.
But I also got The Girls Are Also Nice Here by Laurie Elizabeth Flynn and The Initial Insult by Mindy McGinnis, who is one of my favorite YA authors. But my book of the month boxes also came, and
boxes.
Yes. We're doing our best. So I got the final revival of Opal and Nev, which was compared to Daisy Jones and the Six, in that it is about musicians and an oral history, which is good. But there is also a racial component. I believe the one people in the band ends up being murdered, and it's like this whole thing, and Opal has not talked publicly about it, I don't think, and she's about to, so I'm going to be reading that soon. I did end up getting Too Good to Be True because I do love a thriller, and apparently it's really good. I got an older release, Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett, from a couple years ago. Like everyone, I got The Lost Apothecary, which the cover is so pretty. Like it is a striking cover. And because if you're gonna get 4, you might as well get 5. What's Mine and Yours, which also looks great. So very exciting. Nobody talked to me for a long time. I have a lot of reading to do.
So true. I took a bit of a break from buying books this week, but I did have an unused Libra.fm credit. So I got a book we recently talked about, which is The Book of Essie by Megan McLean Weir. So I'm excited.
I have that on my shelf.
Yeah.
I really liked it.
Yeah. And it could be used in the Taylor Swift Readathon as a blank space, where if you read a book with a name in the title, I think it's like because she used Maybe I've got the prompt wrong.
I think
I
that's
didn't
memoir.
create this or anything. So let me look at the blank spaces. Oh no, I was wrong. The prompt is read a book whose main character's name has appeared in a Taylor song. And Essie is close to Esty, but is not a book. Is not a character who Taylor Swift has written about. So never mind. Either way, it's
I think you should count it.
yeah.
Cool. Well, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Stephanie Henderson, and we're going to be talking about Black speculative fiction, focusing, I think, mostly on YA, but there's a lot to talk about, so we're excited to dive deep into this topic and also get some good recommendations. So stick around, and we'll be back.
It's time for what
And
you
we
should
are
read.
back, and we're joined by my coworker, Stephanie Henderson, one of the most actively literate people I have ever met, which is saying quite a bit.
It is saying too much.
So when we first started talking about having you on the podcast late last year, we were all really excited because we don't always, by which I mean me, necessarily read a lot of science fiction or fantasy or speculative fiction, which is definitely an area you know more about. How long have you been reading it?
I would say it started in college. I had a class on Black women's literature, and that's when I was introduced to Octavia Butler, which everyone knows about. And it just continued from there. And what's so interesting now is that young adult fiction, especially Black literature, is very much focused around Black speculative fiction, fantasy, and science fiction. So it's just so much more things that I can read now, things that I can share with my daughter. So the genre is expanding. But I think that's one of the things we'll talk about later, about how it's not necessarily a trend that just started. You know, the way Black people tell our stories and our mythos and everything has a sort of natural speculative fantasy theme throughout. But it's great to see so many young people, especially Black young people, that can see themselves within speculative fiction, because it wasn't a lot growing up. I mean, we had C.S. Lewis, it was Harry Potter, you know, but so it's great to see a lot of these young Black protagonists in this way.
Definitely. And go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, in the article you sent, or no, the link to the Octavia Butler interview, which we will have in the show notes, she mentioned that when she started, it was like herself and one other person, and then there were like 3 people. And now, yeah, like there are so many.
Yeah, I loved the part of that interview where she was teaching, I think, at Michigan, and one of her students came up to her and just said how much she loved science fiction and was so, I guess, excited to read her work. And she said, I didn't know that we did that. And that just really speaks to the importance of seeing other people doing things, other people who look like you doing things, shows you that you should do it. And, you know, like she said, I just assumed I could do it, right? And so she paved the way. But I think, you know, there's another article you sent us that was on Lit Hub, I think by Tade Thompson, who he is a science fiction author as well. You know, there's a lot of buzz all the time about the rise of Black science fiction and African science fiction, but I know you wanted to talk a little bit, and you touched on it a little bit about, you know, it's always been there. So why do you think that this keeps happening, where it's like, oh, the rise of this?
Well, I think a lot of the times when it comes to representation in Black stuff in popular culture, it doesn't really become part of the popular culture until the larger status quo starts adopting it. And still, when we started to see ourselves on, bestsellers lists and book awards, and it's not just Black people reading about it, it's not just the Black nerds reading about it,
Right.
Starts to reach a much wider audience. And so I think that's when it sort of becomes a trend. But I mean, going back to even, stories that I was told when I was younger, and everybody knows things like Aesop's fables and, those types of stories in which, this, I don't even know if it's a stereotype. To me, it's very real in our family about Black people being superstitious. And, like it's a theme that has grown up, not just within the actual fiction I read, but just in the way that, my family and the culture I grew up in, the way we tell our stories. And so I think the point about that article that you mentioned, that it's a maybe trendy now, but it's something that has always existed. And I think, going back to the student from Octavia Butler's interview, representation really matters. And to be able to see it now reach that wider audience is a great thing. But I also think it's to keep in mind that it's nothing new. And I hope people, when they do read some of these newer novels that we'll get into in our what you should read list later on, that they really will go back and look at more of the older authors and some of the old tales and myths about, legendary culture in, Black Caribbean and African ancient cultures. It goes back for, centuries, millennia. So it's trending in air quotes now, but it's something that's always existed.
For sure. I think that's a really important point. And it's definitely on all of us to keep reading all these books. And because I think the publishing industry, it's like you said, it's trending, right? But it should just be part of the mainstream. It should be part of the list of books that you have on your bedside table to read, because there's so much out there, and there always has been. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I'm pretty sure it's partly my fault, because this is a genre that's very, very new to me. And so it's important to remember sometimes, like, it is new to me. That does not mean it's new for everybody.
That's a great point, Kelly. Yeah.
But to back to Octavia Butler again, we learned recently that her book Kindred is going to be made into a TV series on FX. And I'm reading this from my phone. I'm so excited. It'll be written and executive produced by Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, which is not fun to say. Sorry, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. But
he sounds like a character himself.
He really does. Yeah. But two of the people that created The Americans will also be part of this, and Darren Aronofsky. So a lot of tongue twisting names here. But Brandon Jacobs Jenkins said, "Since my first encounter with the novel nearly 2 decades ago, there have been few, if any, books, and even fewer authors who have meant as much to me as Kindred and Octavia Butler. It has been the highlight and honor of my career thus far to try and finally bring this timeless story to life." Which absolutely, we all just read it for the first time last year, and I'm still mad that wasn't taught to me in school. Definitely college, but I mean,
same here. Like I wasn't introduced to this world of Black speculative fiction until college, and I'm like, wait, why didn't I know about this before? But just speaking to Octavia Butler's legacy, in a lot of the books that I'll mention today, so many of the dedications and acknowledgments and reading about some of the author's background acknowledge Octavia Butler's influence on their success and that she was their introduction into the world in which they write today. And it just goes to show you, I know, Kelly, we're talking about how unfortunate it is how young she died, but the legacy she was able to imprint, she was able to leave within this world, it's funny because, you know, she has stories about Black immortality. It has sort of made her immortal in that sense, like her name and legacy will live on. And, you know, we talk about one of the novels that I was going to mention. Actually, it's an anthology of short stories by Patrice Caldwell called "A Phoenix Must Burn." First Must Burn. This is great for people like me who are getting older, and long, thick novels don't keep your attention span is shortened. This is awesome. Like in her dedication in the front of the book, she dedicates it simply to Octavia and Tony, and we know those two names. And just seeing that throughout a lot of the books we'll talk about today, again, just goes to show you her impact on this you know, the fictitious world, and this genre that keeps growing, you know, as more young people are introduced to it.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great segue into our what you should read round robin. So Stephanie, why don't you go first? Well, you already started with one, but do you want to recommend a book to our listeners?
Sure. I have a few, so I'm not sure how long or short you want me to keep the list.
Whatever you want.
Some of these I've read, some of these I need to read. As always, I had a very ambitious reading list before the podcast, and then life happens. So first, I brought this up, and I think it's very important considering today's times. We just went through the anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death. George Floyd's name, we got to keep saying their names, but recently in the news about the settlement and his death and the trial that's pending for those police officers. And it's the theme of Black immortality. And what does it mean to be Black and not be able to die? And to see your history and live through these generations and these stories. So what is really interesting to me, some of these stories that go with that theme are a lot of Black vampire stories. So if you're into vampires and things of that nature, some good ones to read are My Soul to Keep, and I'm going to butcher her name, but it's Tananarive Due, and she's actually on Stephen King's reading list. And she has an African Immortal series. This is one of those series. And then also Fledgling by Octavia Butler, which is her last novel. The Gilda Stories is actually a book with a Black bisexual vampire heroine. And having a daughter that's part of the LGBTQ community. I'm actually getting her to read that shortly because, again, it's so hard to find yourselves in literature and fiction. She has it much easier than I did. And luckily she has a mom that can give her those kinds of recommendations, and we can talk about those. But those are three great novels in fiction that I would recommend about Black immortality. But if you want to read more about the history of Black vampire literature and immortality literature, there's two nonfiction books that I would recommend. One is by Rafiki Jenkins, recently published in 2019, called The Paradox of Blackness in African American Vampire Fiction. And the other one is Black Female Vampires in African American Women's Novels from 1977 to 2011. And that's by Kendra Parker. So if you're into vampire stories, these are some great recommendations, again, from fiction and nonfiction side. And again, keeping in mind, what does it mean to be Black and immortal? These themes run throughout the history of Black literature, you know, injustice and things of that nature. And so I really like that theme when it comes to empowering and what does it mean to be able to live forever. And then some other ones, a lot of people may or may not know that a lot of sub-Saharan, especially West African ancient cultures, lineage is passed down through the maternal line. And so a lot of the themes you read, especially in Black women's literature, not just speculative fiction, is the theme of passing down through maternal lines, blood rituals, themes of the river, ladies' menstrual cycles. It has a theme throughout. One is in Octavia Butler's Kindred that we spoke about before. The other is the Gilded Ones. That's a newer novel, young adult fiction by Namina, Forna. Yes. I have
Oh,
it.
the cover is gorgeous.
Yeah, it
I
is.
love it so much. It's so good.
Okay, so I want you to talk about that one because I have not yet had a chance to read it. It's on my what you should read list for myself.
Yeah.
And then of course, a lot of people know about Tomi Adeyemi's series, Children of Blood and Bone and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which were awesome.
We actually read that for our book club, right, Kelly?
We did.
A couple years ago. Yeah.
So what did you guys think about it?
I loved it. Loved it.
Yeah,
I did too. I didn't think at first when I first got into it, I was like, well, we'll see how this goes. But then by the end, I'm like, how I have to read the second one like right now. And that's why I didn't get into some of my other lists and what you should read, because I was like, well, but as soon as I finished the first book in the series, I had to move on to the second one. So that was really good. And then if you're into like fantasy lands and mythical creatures, some newer novels, one, again, Children of Blood and Bone and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, again, fantasy lands, mythical creatures. They have like lionaires and cheetahnaires, and it's based on a land that's mimicked after Africa. The magical language is Yoruba, which is, a Nigerian, West African language. But also the Raybearers by Jordan Ifueku. I have it back here.
Oh, I want to read this so bad.
Yeah,
I've heard such good things.
Yeah, this is on my list. And then this is what I'm reading now, A Song Below Water by, and I really love this cover too, by Bethany C. Morrow. And she's a young author. Again, this is another young adult novel. And what I love about this particular book, about being a Black woman who's often people say to me sometimes, kind of loud, you're speaking kind of loud. The protagonist in his voice is a siren. And it just so happens that all the sirens are Black women, but not all Black women are sirens. And what does it mean as a Black woman to have your voice silenced, either voluntarily or involuntarily? And again, speaking about Breonna Taylor, this book starts off with a Black woman who was murdered by her lover. But then it comes to find out that, she's actually a siren. So it's almost like there's an excuse for her murder because she's a siren. And even that she's a Black woman, there's a quote in here, I marked it, that really spoke to me about that. And let me see if I can find it. I have it marked off. It says, they just went along with her postmortem character assassination because she was already the worst thing she could be, a Black woman. And a lot of times you'll see it in social media and in forums in which a lot of Black folks hang out in about the protection of the Black woman. And again, bringing it back to Breonna Taylor and other women like her, and even, Black transgender women and the strife that they go through and the high rate of murders in that community. Again, this book really is speaking to me because of, again, the idea of using your voice as part of a movement. And, Kelly, personally, like working in corporate America, I'm always like thinking about I don't want to be like the loud, angry Black woman in the office, but I still want to speak my mind. And, it's something working in publishing, for all of my career as I'm older now and I'm more comfortable within my position and understand my worth and what I bring to companies and things like that, my voice has grown. It has become louder. I'm not as timid. But I think that this story is great for young women who are trying to find their voice and not being in Black, white, in between. I think it's something that women, we go through. It's a common thing that we share no matter the race. And so I'm just probably midway through that book and I'm really enjoying it. And then the last thing I have on what you should read is A Phoenix First Must Burn. And this is actually, the title gets its title from Butler's Parable of Talents. And it's again about, you know, a lot of themes about Black girl magic and rising from the ashes. And again, that's an ode to themes from other famous Black women writers such as Maya Angelou. We all know her poem. I haven't started reading this yet, but I'm really looking forward to get into it because it just has a lot of young writers, that are just starting out, and seeing some of their work in a collection is really awesome. So, and this one has a really pretty cover too.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that was published last March, right?
Yes.
Like right at the beginning of the
Yep.
pandemic.
The
I
pandemic.
really want to, I love a good short story collection. So I will have to pick that up.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are
So-
great recommendations.
Of
Mhm.
course. Yeah.
I think we have a couple we'd like to recommend to you as well. I think some of them probably fit into the same kind of categories that you mentioned as well. Rachael, do you actually want to talk about the Gilded ones first?
Yeah, I could talk about that because you had mentioned it, and I just finished it this morning. Actually, I read most of it yesterday, but it follows Dika, I think is how her name is pronounced, and she lives in, it is fantasy, and she lives in this world where they have what are called purity rituals, where they cut you and see what color your blood is. So if your blood runs red, you're considered pure. And if your blood runs gold, you're considered a demon. You're considered impure. And there's something called the death mandate where you are, and it's only women that have to go through, only girls that have to go through the purity.
Of course.
Gee.
When they're like 16 too. So there was this death mandate where you have to be basically killed if you're found impure. But there are these things called death shrieks that have been like, you know, going into the cities. There are these magical creatures and they've been killing people. So the emperor has actually started an army of the impure, quote unquote, girls that say, oh, instead of being killed, you can come train in my army to kill death streaks. So because they have like powers, the ones with the gold blood, they're stronger, faster, and they're, you know, good fighters. So all these girls come together in this training ground, and Dika, she is starting to realize that she has powers that are a little different than the other girls that she knows, but she's trying to keep it a secret because she doesn't want to be singled out and like given her final death is what they call it, because they can die and come back to life, but they can also be given what's called a final death, and that's different for every person. And they're basically enslaved to the emperor to fight in his army because they're like, either fight or die. You have no choice. And then, so what I love about this book is the relationship, the friendships that form among the girls. Like they call each other their blood sisters, and they, you know, we have each other's back. And there is like a romance in this. I mean, it's YA fantasy. There is a little romance in it, but it's just sort of a B plot. And she's like, oh, that's nice. I like him and he likes me, but my sisters are everything and I would die for them, you know, which is great. So this is definitely like, I would have recommended this on Valentine's Day episode if I had read it before that, you know, because the friendships in it are so strong. And then, you know, going through the book, she's finding out like, oh, our blood is not cursed, it's blessed. And she's finding out all these things about how the truth of who they called the Alaki, and she's finding out, you know, the truth of who they're descended from and how they came to be. And she's like, you know, everything was a lie. And, you know, she's trying to start fighting back against, you know, the emperor and the oppressors. And it is so exciting. Like the story is just, it sucks you in and you can't stop reading it. I couldn't stop reading it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to read that one. And you mentioned how like the romance part is a B plot, and it's all about sisterhood. I find that often in a lot of the new young adult Black fantasy books, like even in Adeyemi's series, The Children of Blood and Blown and Virtue and Vengeance, there's like some romance, but it's really mostly about the two female protagonists. Again, the song Below Water is about two sisters. Well, one is an adopted sister, but they consider each other full sisters. And of course they're young, they're teenagers, so boys come up, but they're really, you know, again, they're the background in the major story about sisterhood and the power in that. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
That sounds so good.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you have anything to recommend?
Okay, so I have two. The first is Wings of Ebony by Jewelle, which I loved both. I'm not gonna be like, oh, you know, this was so good, but okay, in Wings of Ebony, it's about this teenager named Rue, and she lived with her single mother and younger sister. And she and her sister have different dads, which I mention because Tasha's sister is a normal human man, and Rue's dad is a god. So Rue, half mortal, half god, she should not exist, but she does. And when her mom is murdered, she learns that, you know, by the way, I'm half god. And she is taken to live with her dad, which she doesn't want to do. She doesn't know him at all. And the place where he lives, once you get there and you learn about it, you're not allowed to leave. And since her mom is dead and her sister is now living with other relatives, like that's not good. She misses her sister. She's worried about her sister. So on the first anniversary of her mom's death, she figures out how to sneak back and go see her sister. And she learns that her sister is in very real danger. And this is not a spoiler. This is literally like the first few pages of the book.
Mm.
And another fun thing about gods, they have magic. And so she has magic, and a lot of it, but she's not really good at it yet. She doesn't know what to do with it. And so she has to figure out what kind of trouble her sister is in, how bad it is, you know, how many people does she have to worry about? And oh yeah, magic will keep us safe, but only if I can figure out how to use it. And there's a lot of symbolism here and allegories, but obviously all of that is spoilers. But I think that's what I like most about the Black fantasy that I've read so far, is that it's about what it's about, and it's a great story, but it's also like so much deeper. And I haven't really read that as much in, like, say, the other kind of similar books that I've read. Like there's not really necessarily that much of a deeper meaning in the Hunger Games, which I love, and which is not fantasy, that's dystopian, but you know, it's different. But
Well, and I also think, you know, it's a, you know, running around that theme, especially in the young adult fiction of coming of age, finding your magic, finding your power, finding your voice. And as young women, that's often, you know, dampened very early in our age, you know, very young in our young lives. And you sort of, when boys are encouraged to be loud and boisterous and speak their mind, you know, you don't want to ever seem like the B word because you're speaking your mind and everything. But and boys don't have to go through that. And I think a lot of these novels are encouraging young women to, you know, find the strength and power in their voice and in their magic and, you know, the power of the feminine. And it's very encouraging that way to have those sort of coming of age stories for young Black women. Just going to what we talked about at the beginning, because there were hardly any, you know, out there in the world, or they were just a part of a very small niche group of folks like me that would search for it. So I think that's great to hear. I'm definitely going to read. And that was Wings of Ebony, right? Kelly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, by Jewelle.
Okay.
it is so, so good. And my other one is called Daughters of Jubilation by Carolee Corthron. And that is like historical fiction as well. It's set in the Jim Crow era South. And like you said about like the matriarchal society, every Black woman in her family has the jubilation, which is basically psychic powers and gifts. And Evie would probably say that it's ridiculous that it's called the jubilation because it is not particularly great. Because if she starts feeling a very strong emotion, stuff happens. For example, in the first chapter of the book, she's just hanging out, living her life, and this white family is also in the park, and they keep like glaring at her like, what are you doing here in your park, like in this park, ruining our day? And she realizes this and she gets very mad, and there's a tiny earthquake, and then the tree that they're sitting under starts to fall a little bit, and she manages to save them and gets put in the paper for it. But she's like, I mean, yeah, I saved him, but I tried to kill him first. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it's good that she saved them, but she's a better person than I am, basically. But then I guess really in Jim Crow era South, you don't really have the luxury of being angry at people who are awful to you.
Right.
But anyway, so like all of the women in her family have it. And it turns out that it's not just the women in her family. It's, you know, like not every Black woman, but a lot of them do. And it's been even before, like basically as long as there have been Black women in this country, you know, like this power has been used to keep them safe. And it's so good. It's just really, really good. And the way that some of these things tie together, it's just brilliant, but also it's stuff that we don't realize how it all fits together until the very end. So again, like really big spoilers. So everybody please read it and then let me talk to you about it again. I have some very real thoughts. But there's also a little bit of a love story, and I like that it's also a very sex positive story, because it feels like a lot of times teenage girls are taught to be ashamed of their bodies, and you know, Evie's not. And it also, though, like her worth is in herself as a person, not the power that she has or the people that love her. It's like it is her as a person that's amazing, not like what she can do or who her relationships are with. And I love that too, because that feels,
or how she can serve, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As women, oftentimes like our worth is based on how we serve our families, our friends, you know, being the protectors and nurturers, a lot on our roles and not just who we are. And it's funny, I'm a mom. I'm not sure if any of you guys are as well, but oftentimes I have to take those moments where I can just be Stephanie. I'm not Jaden's mom. I'm not my mom's daughter. You know, I'm not the good niece. Like I just need my moments with my book and my coffee at a cafe where I'm just completely Stephanie. And I'm definitely going to pick that one up. That sounds really good, Kelly.
It's so good.
Those both sound great. And I love when there's like this unexplained magic system and you can't really, I love it when you read a book and you're like, I can't tell you anything about it because it would be spoiling so many great moments. And that kind of reminds me of Legendborn, which I mentioned a little bit before we started recording, by Tracy Dion. And it's a YA urban fantasy, I guess. And the main character is Bree, and she's 16 and she gets enrolled in this early college program at UNC Chapel Hill. But right before that happens, her mom dies actually in a car accident, but she is pretty sure something funny happened surrounding her mom's death. And she can't quite explain it. She sees something out of the ordinary. And then when she gets to school, she sees something else, and it kind of reminds her of what happened to her mom. And so she kind of gets wrapped up in this world. She meets these people who are part of a secret society on campus. And it turns out they are all descended from the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur. And so so she learns about this system of magic. Basically, like, there are people who are Merlins, there are people who are these scions of the knights, and she starts a relationship with this boy who's basically the heir to King Arthur. But they don't know that she also has powers, and she is sort of infiltrating their world because she wants to find out what happened to her mom. And so it's this really interesting setup, because she's infiltrated this very white space. And there are a few other characters who are not white, who, have a conversation with her pretty early on about the racism that is kind of baked into the structure of this secret society. But she stays there because it's her goal to figure out what happened to her mom, and she thinks that this will lead her to answers. And then meanwhile, she meets a woman on campus who knew her mom, and then she discovers the powers that her mom had. So that reminded me of what you were saying about these stories that have a matriarchal magic being passed down. And she discovers that she and her mom can do something called root magic. And then the story from there just goes, it sounds like I've told you a lot, and I've only barely scratched the surface of what's in this book. It is so, so good. The ending is incredible. There is a love story. There's actually a love triangle, and it is kind of a big part of the book, but the real crux of it is the connection that she has with the other women in her family, going back generations. Because every woman in her family that had a daughter, and then the mom died early. And so it's like they couldn't pass down what they knew in person. And so it's like this knowledge was hidden from them for so long. And so it's so good. I highly, highly recommend it. It's got so much in it.
Wow. That does sound really good.
Stephanie, have you read Nnedi Okorafor's books?
I have not.
So I would definitely recommend her. And she's mentioned in the article you sent too. She's just really well known. I think she's Ghanaian writer, and Akata Witch is one of her most well known.
I know the title.
And that's like this girl finds out she's magical, and she goes to a magic school. So people sometimes compare it to Harry Potter for that reason. But it's just a wonderful YA story. But then I also just started reading her new novella, Remote Control. And that one is so good. It's about a girl who basically becomes the angel of death. She gets basically interacts with this alien seed during a meteor shower one day, and then gets imbued with these powers. And then all of a sudden she can kill with just a look. Like, she can fell an entire village, and she's this little girl, right? She's like 7. And so then it kind of fast forwards through a few years, and like she'll come to your town, and everyone's like, they know that she's here to take. But she goes on this quest to figure out like why this happened to her, because she gets imbued with these powers, and then her family dies, and then she is like alone. So she has to go on this quest to figure out why she has these powers, or why it happened to her. It's great. I highly recommend.
Okay. Wow. If you see me going, I'm writing down titles and things as we go. My Amazon account is going to be like, oh, I hear you're back.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I know, it's out of control, my list.
I mean,
yep.
I definitely want to. Oh, go ahead, Rach.
I was just gonna say we should mention The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ankrum too.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That's definitely science fiction. It's definitely near future science fiction. It's not so out there, but I mean, it does. It does involve space travel that has not yet even been close to being achieved, because I think they travel out like, you know, to Pluto and beyond. So definitely have not achieved that yet. So but it's just such a great story of friendship and camaraderie and, you know, found family. I love it.
Yeah, love K. Ankrum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure we could go on and on for a long time, but anything else before we sign off?
I just want to say this was so fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my time talking about this. It's so funny. Just before I got on the podcast, my aunt called me and I tell her, and I'm like, you know, I'm going on the podcast today about books and things. And she goes into this whole history of like the readers in our family and where we got like our avid, you know, enthusiasm from reading. And I tell her like, well, I got it from you. You know, she would always recommend books to me. And she actually starts talking about some older fantasies, like Hans Andersen Christian. You know, growing up, she didn't have these types of books in life. So, and she talks about, particularly The Snow Queen was one of her favorite ones by him. And then also Gulliver's Travels. And how like her elder sister, which is my oldest aunt, read that to her so much that she ended up memorizing it. I'm like, you memorized the whole Gulliver's Travels?
Wow.
But, you know, and just passing down that love of reading and literature. I didn't know how far back it went with the women in my family. And so it was just really great to have that conversation with her about it. So I'm thanking you guys, because I don't know if we would have talked about it, at least in that context, if I hadn't brought up that I was going to be on this podcast today.
Oh, that's great.
I love that.
Yeah.
And Dhonielle Page wrote a book called Stealing Snow, which is a Black retelling of the Snow Queen. I have not read it. I imagine it's wonderful, though.
I'm gonna buy it for her and send it to her.
I think it's $7 on Kindle.
Okay, so what was you said, Daniel?
Dhonielle Page, Paige, like the middle name. And I think it's called Stealing Snow. I'm gonna double check that super fast. But we are actually doing an episode on fairy tale retellings, and I was trying to find one more, and that was a strong contender. So,
oh, that sounds
definitely
great.
Put that on my aunt's what you should read list.
Stealing Snow, yes,
great.
Yeah. Right. Well, we so enjoyed having you on the podcast today, Stephanie. Thank you again for taking the time. And are you on social media, or do you want to plug anything before?
You can find me on Instagram as Steffi Monique. So that's STFFIEMONIQUE. And so I'm just plugging myself there. This was great. If you guys ever need me to talk books again, I'll be happy to come on.
We would love to have you back. That'd be great. Great.
Definitely.
So that's our show. Don't forget, you can also get any of the Book of the Month Club books and your first box for $9.99 with the promo code What You Should Read, all one word.
Yes, and be sure to follow us on social media at WYSR_podcast on Instagram and Twitter. Follow us on Goodreads at What You Should Read Podcast. You can email us at whatyoushouldreadpodcast@gmail.com. So if you want us to talk about anything in particular, if you want to send us book news or book recommendation requests, we're happy to receive them. And check out, you know, the readathons we have going on right now. So there's we're still doing the Bachelorette readathon, which is, I think, going to go through the Bachelorette season 2, Julia, or?
Yeah, we can keep it going. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
We should do a check-in soon.
Yeah, for sure. We'll check in with it next week. And then we also have the Taylor Swift readathons going on this entire month of March. 'Tis the Damn Readathon. So you can find on Twitter at Damn Readathon is the Twitter account for that.
Yes, and now you know what you should read.
You're welcome.
It's time for What You Should Read, the podcast all about the titles you need. Join 3 book lovers and a guest as they cover all the best new titles to enjoy with your tea.